After investigating what they thought was a crashed plane in the forest outside an Air Force base, a group of soldiers claimed they witnessed a UFO. Their sighting became one of the most well-documented UFO cases ever, with some calling it Britain's Roswell. Today we continue our theme with Week 2 of Unsettling Forest Mysteries as we discuss the Rendlesham Forest Incident. This is Red Web. Welcome back, Task Force, to another episode of Red Web. I'm Trevor Collins, and with me is the very psychic, the very humble, the very beautiful Alfredo Diaz.
I do not have psychic powers.
You do, and we're going to keep it that way. Your gut instinct has been too on point. You've either been reading my notes or you're psychic. But welcome back to Red Web, the show all about unsolved mysteries, true crime, cryptids, supernatural events, paranormal, anything unsolved. We're your guys.
Yeah. I'm going to open this up with a discussion, and it's probably just because I saw Nope 2 weeks ago when it was released.
Absolutely.
And the big thing there is just like, if a spaceship were to crash land right now, in this office,
boom,
we survive, whatever, right? It just landed. We're good. We're surviving.
We're going to be dissected and questioned by scientists, by the way, if we survive something like that.
True.
Okay, but anyway.
Or just close enough for us to go be there first. We're hanging out.
It happens.
All right, restructure it. We're hanging out.
Okay.
Best buds.
We're vibing and vaping at the crash site.
Crash lands close to us. We're the first ones there.
Yes.
Like,
stick your hand in it and
say
get
we
infected.
have access to this for an absurd amount of time, 24 hours.
Yes.
How the hell would we prove that this thing is real?
iPhone, IG live stream.
Live stream, right?
Yeah.
Like a live stream?
And they'd be like, wow, that's some really dope CG effects on that live stream. And I'd be like, no, dude, it's real. I just wouldn't touch it. I've seen too many movies, though.
Right,
you get stuck by something, then you become a zombie or infected.
But just like whether it's terrible quality or super high quality, I just feel like it's so hard to prove things nowadays.
Right.
What if you like just touch it with a stick or like chuck a rock at it?
We know
like
it's real.
Contact.
Christian,
What
I'm talking about
the caveman test.
You show with a
in the video with rock.
It's like we're not
with
sticking it through a CG animation.
It was like, you want your proof? Here's your proof. Holds a stick up into the air and starts poking the UFO.
Yeah, and then they can
shatters
see
a
it,
window.
they can hear it. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, no, I think that's a valid point. Catch that thing in 4K, stream it so that way immediately if the servers get wiped or whatever, someone has captured. You just need to say, capture my screen, start screen recording this. This needs to be found.
Oh my God, we just discovered a UFO just crash landed. Red Web Task Force is here at Red Web Pod. And you start just throwing out all the
Right. You just data dump.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, let's see if that happened at the Rendlesham Forest Incident, because this is one of the most documented cases, though I doubt by your facial expression you've ever heard of this one.
No.
Yeah.
What?
Listen, I love that we've covered some of the UK stuff, because we covered what amounts to essentially Area 51 of the UK.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about, Roswell, a very well-known New Mexico, United States kind of UFO incident. There's a lot of parallels with this one. So let's talk about it. Continuing, like I said, our theme month. This is week 2, talking about mysteries and creepy incidents happening in the forest. We're going to cover a lot of things, not just the paranormal, not just UFOs. There's some true crime happening in forest too. Check that out last week with the witch elm. Anyway, let's dive in. Rendlesham Forest sits in Suffolk, England, 2 hours northeast of London. The forest is roughly 3,700 acres, or 5.8 square miles if you prefer, filled with paths for walkers and cyclists, camping grounds, cafes, sculptures, and many more. If you were to search this now, many of the autocompletes are for people camping and going for leisure activities. The forest bordered former military airfields, the Royal Air Force Woodbridge, as well as the Royal Air Force Bentwaters, which was home to the U.S. Air Force during the Cold War. So you're going to hear a lot about the U.S. Air Force activity here in the UK, so don't get it mixed up here. Now, the incident went down at 3 a.m., the witching hour, on December 26, 1980. There was a strange light that was reported. So this is, by the way, the day after Christmas, the night after Christmas. So this wasn't claws in the air.
Then
okay, we didn't catch Santa.
Not only do you not have that many people on call, but you probably have like Oh man,
ample.
You're deep in that roster.
Yeah.
Right. You're not talking about like the all-stars. It's like the people that are like manning the posts are people that are usually on the bench. You know?
Yeah. A lot of sensitive stuff to protect around that area. There's a lot of theories as to what went down that night.
Okay.
And I feel like no matter which way the cookie crumbles, if something's going down outside of a U.S. Air Force or a Royal Air Force base, some problems.
So this was just outside of it?
The forest is bordered by 2 Air Force bases. So for this to go down right there,
they could
raise a lot of eyebrows.
The UFO could not have picked the worst place.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting. We'll get into it. So we'll talk about the incident, then we'll unfold how people kind of researched or kind of try to dissect what went down. And then, of course, the theories of this one are very colorful. They range in a lot of, from the pragmatic to the very interesting. So anyway, to continue on, it went down at 3 a.m., December 26, 1980, and there was a strange light that was reported in the forest during a patrol of the East Gate of Woodbridge. Thinking that the lights may have been coming from a crashed plane or perhaps a helicopter, U.S. Air Force personnel, including Jim Peniston, John Burroughs, and Ed Cabansag, went to investigate. They trekked deep into the forest until they started hearing animals of nearby farms, and these animals were making sounds of distress as if something was bothering them, something that they weren't used to. So imagine now, very eerily, deep in the night, very dark, you just saw a light in these forests. You keep going into these forests, not knowing what you're about to see, and you hear animals in the distance all around you just kind of crying in distress.
Double nope.
That's,
here's the thing.
You're strapped in at that point.
No, just go ahead and pull that ripcord.
You're trying to eject like Batman in the Dark Knight, like
out of there.
Get a plane to pull you out of there
so fast. Here's the thing: like if the animals are going crazy, even if it's not like some UFO thing, you know that there's just like I don't know, maybe some type of predator,
sure,
like wolf.
But what predator
like
causes lights?
Someone strap a light on a wolf.
This light has a flashlight strapped to its head.
Yeah. See, that's just like a. What worst case, best case scenario is just I don't know, people doing some late night stuff.
Sure, it offers the opportunity for it to be, you know, some yabos to use some English slang. If I'm using that right, some like
yabo.
Yeah, you know, some yuppies, some young unemployed, running around, running amok,
hooligans.
Teenagers.
Yeah.
Okay. Just trying to like do some pranks. You know, a gentle prank at an Air Force base. What could go wrong? Well, Burroughs and Peniston claimed that they received a radio message from Heathrow Airport stating that an object was seen over Woodbridge on radar. So that'll be very interesting. That'll come up later. They entered a clearing where they came across a metallic triangular craft that was about 2.3 meters across by 2 meters tall. If you prefer feet, that's about 6.5 feet to 10 feet wide. Quite a range there. And then about 6.5 feet tall. Triangular craft had a pulsating red light on top with blue lights on the bottom. There's a very kind of rough sketch that they offered at that time. I'll show you here and now. But yeah, it's a triangle with a red ball at the top indicating the red/orangey light, blue blinking and pulsating lights at the bottom. And then on this drawing, he indicates there's a roundish kind of area for a white light, almost like a spotlight down below it.
The aerodynamics on that thing, would a triangle have great?
I think there'd be a lot of, if it was going through an atmosphere, hard edges like a triangle, especially if they're more acute, would just create separation on the airflow, which creates negative pressure, creates a lot of skin drag. But if it's an interstellar capsule with nuclear power, I don't really think they care about aerodynamics. I think, you know, they're mostly in space, and then when they're at a planet with atmosphere, they just kind of whatever. I don't know.
Interesting.
It also depends, you know, if they're bending space-time to move around, they're not really impacted like that. I don't know. I don't know what kind of craft we're working with, but that's what they kind of describe.
Yeah, it's different than what we usually, use. It's like a saucer, and it's like, how to describe it? 2 plates.
Yeah, you said literally 2 plates, one upturned.
Cupped together, yeah, and then like a little teacup on top.
So many people tweeted us images of that.
They're like, is this the aircraft?
Like, oh my God, I found a UFO in my dining room.
But that's what it looks like.
That's why they're called flying saucers, because the saucer is traditionally that cup that holds all your tea dribble, right?
Yeah.
It's like a fancy cup holder or a fancy coaster.
Yeah, this is just way different. Triangle with a ball on top.
Right. Imagine they looked a little different and we called them flying doilies. You know what I mean? You know what a doily is? That little paper thing that you set your cup on?
Yeah.
All right. So they saw this triangular craft. They made these sketches. They described it. They also said, quote, it illuminated the entire forest with a white light. This will be very important later on for one of the theories.
Other people must have seen that then.
Oh, definitely. So when they describe this aircraft, there's a few conflicts. Of course, with every word of mouth story, there are a few conflicts. One of them being about how it was sat in this clearing. Some thought it might have hovered. Some thought it was supported by legs.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's way out there.
Two different.
So as we're talking about a triangle UFO,
right.
It might have been legs. Well, that's weird.
Right, like landing gear, essentially. So when they approached this aircraft, it flew away, just suddenly left the clearing and off it went. The following morning, airmen returned to this site in order to figure out what went down, investigate the area, and they found 3 depressions in the ground making an equilateral triangle shape on the ground. So basically, as if something heavy and something with a triangular pattern of landing gear had sat in that area. It confirms essentially to them that what they saw that night was real, that something was there. Just what is it is the question. So police were also called to investigate, but they believe that the marks were simply caused by burrowing animals, that these weren't depressions by a craft, but rather just wildlife doing their thing. Now on December 28th, Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, we'll talk about him quite a bit, he visited the supposed landing site with other airmen. They attempted to use floodlights to assist their investigation, but those floodlights began malfunctioning during their investigation. Halt and his team also took radiation measurements of this area, including the impressions, and found a few subtle signals of beta and gamma radiation on this scale of about 0.1 milliroentgens. So very simply, milliroentgens are a way to measure, it's a unit to measure the electric charge released by radiation. This isn't a whole lot of radiation. We'll kind of talk about this more in the theories as well, but again, very simply, the average person's exposure is about 1 milliroentgen, and this is measuring 0.1 milliroentgens. The reason why this is interesting, and I'll probably talk about this again later, is that the surrounding area had an average background radiation measurement of 0.015, whereas this site and the gear kind of spots in particular was 0.1.
Ever so slightly.
So it's slight, it's easy to dismiss. However, it is just about, it's 10 times or so the surrounding area.
Like, I wonder if that's just like, I guess that is above average, but I just wonder if there's like what the actual scientific,
like what the reasoning for it being there is and why it's so subtle.
I'm trying to wrap my head around it. Like, what would be the scientific reasoning as to why this would spike, right? Or like a very, very minor spike.
Well, I can say that uranium is present usually in the ground, very, very subtle trace amounts, which release radiation. There's radon naturally occurring in the air. There's a lot of things that surprisingly kind of emit radioactive activity. Again, there's a few reasons why you could totally dismiss this measurement, but there are also, there's one strong reason why you wouldn't, given that the surrounding area wasn't necessarily reading as high. And according to Halt himself, the radiation levels peaked at the center of this triangle as well as at the depressions, which is what kind of keep them interested on this. So it's one of those factoids I wanted to mention, but could really sway you depending on how you looked at it on, is this real or is this kind of just a MacGuffin? Now, while investigating the radiation, they witnessed a, quote, red sun-like light from the east, which sent out glowing particles and eventually became 5 glowing pieces before totally disappearing. Later still into the investigation, 3 elliptical-shaped star-like objects were witnessed, moving quickly and angularly, 1 in the south and 2 in the north. The 2 in the north remained there for over an hour, while the one in the south was visible for around 3 hours.
And this was in the forest?
And this is in the forest, kind of as they were investigating this clearing. These are some of the ongoing. So very briefly, they saw a red sun-like light. They had their spotlights malfunctioning. They picked up subtle increases, very subtle increases in radiation. And they also saw 2 lights in the north and 1 in the south. The south one lasting about 3 hours, the other 2 in the north being a little bit shorter.
Did they not want to book it to these lights?
I believe that at one point they tried to follow one of the beams, and we'll talk about that later on. But The southern light beamed light down at them every so often, which was something of interest. But Halt requested radar of these objects because obviously you're like, well, something's in the air. And we had previous information from Heathrow that something was pinged on the radar. So let's get more of that. Well, these lights didn't seem to appear on radar. However, there are some verbal conflicting sources claiming otherwise, that perhaps these were on radar, but have since been scrubbed from the records. This is where things really start to get hairy, because you're now in the realm of storytelling and memory,
right,
which can be exaggerative
and then
or
also
forgotten.
potentially the government muddying the waters and the information just to cause confusion and chaos.
Yep.
It seems, at least as of right now, that there's just there's a good chunk of people that are seeing things and potentially tangible things, whether it be the lights or what they're examining. That's pretty wild. I mean, we've had some people be like, oh, a ton of people have seen things in the sky.
Right.
But this is just like, oh, there's a light down there.
Yeah.
And it up for hours. Okay.
There's some really interesting, now I hate to tease, but I want to put the information where it belongs to keep this all organized for the sake of following what's going on here. So that's the story as it unfolded. Now, I want to remind everybody, there's some really interesting information in the theories section that we're going to discuss around certain landmarks in the area and certain other events that went down. And what you're going to find is there's a trend that really causes a lot of confusion around this incident, where there's a conflation of events and explanations that all work well together at the same time. It's very interesting, and we'll get into all that.
There was a construction site or a light tower. There's a train that circles half of the perimeter of the damn forest.
Right. There's a lot of things going on, and they can almost all exist at the same time.
Damn. Okay.
So it's like I don't know. Anyway, let's talk about the response though. So that's how it went down that night. And Halt reported his experience and other details of the sighting in what would become the Halt Memo. This is really what helped kick this whole thing off and make it one of the most documented UFO incidents to date. Now, he sent this memo to the Ministry of Defense, aka the MOD, which I'll say a lot, 2 weeks after his experience in the forest. Some of the info, such as the dates that he includes in this memo, are incorrect because this memo was mostly written from memory. Nobody went through a proofread situation here, but the memo wasn't released to the public, though, until the Freedom of Information Act request on June of 1983.
Okay, like 3 years later.
Yeah. In the cover letter of this memo, Colonel Peter Bent mentions that the U.S. Air Force discarded their copy of the memo, so they had to go get the copy from the Royal Air Force. Interesting, we're immediately losing and throwing away data.
Why?
If you don't think there's anything to it, or if there's a cover-up, delete it.
Yeah. The cover-up portion makes sense. But like when you're investigating something and it could potentially, at some point, you could have a breakthrough and be like, oh my God, this is like a huge discovery. It's going to change mankind. And you go, I discarded my notes.
Right. Oh, we won't need this.
Damn.
Extraterrestrial walks on Earth. Nah, we don't need that.
Right.
Get rid of it. Now, the public was first informed of this incident around the same time, October 2nd, 1983, via an article in News of the World titled UFO Lands in Suffolk. So it isn't until almost 3 full years later that this becomes public knowledge. The memo in the article sparked so much popularity that Rendlesham became known as the UFO capital of the UK. Halt's experience was also recorded on tape and released to the public in 1984, and then journalist Ian Ridpath transcribed this recording in order to release it to the public. And one of the things that was interesting that came from this recording now transcribed was that supposedly the highest radiation recording at the landing site wasn't 0.1, but rather 0.07 milliroentgens, which one might think is a rounding error, but that's about a 30% decrease on this radiation.
Yeah, so if anything, like slightly more in line with the average, I guess.
It kind of softens it as a strong piece of evidence, but I don't know. It's I don't know what to do with that, you know? Right. It's a real gray zone.
It's just, the thing is like, the radiation on average is so small and minuscule. Then you're just like slightly higher.
Right.
In the grand scale of things.
Right.
It's like 10 times more or something like that. But then right there, you just feel like you're dealing with like little grains of salt. Or it's just like, it's normally 3 grains of salt, and then we've got 10 grains, and you know what? It's actually 7 grains. In the grand scheme of things, like that's not much. Is it like a thing, or maybe it's just like because it's in the UK or whatnot? How are they able to just divulge all this information like 3 years later?
So 3 years later, because the U.S. had a footprint at one of those Royal Air Force bases, the Freedom of Information Act request came through in June of 1983 and said, hey, what went down there? And because of that, they have to divulge that information. Now, if there are security issues and actively going on like pieces of
investigation and stuff like that,
they would mark out things, or they would deny the Freedom of Information release. But that's essentially why it came out.
Right. They're like, yeah, there's nothing here. Here you go. That's crazy, because I was like, 3 years. What a like quick turnaround for it to just be like, it's all to the public, even the recordings and everything.
Yeah.
Like, the public got a lot fast.
It's a lot. And that's why it helped make it so well documented. But kind of coming back to the response to this, that's kind of what went down with some of the journalists and some of the interviews. Now, during the 2 weeks between the incident and between Halt's experiences going out via the memo, something else went down that's actually quite relevant to one of our episodes a few weeks ago. There was a forestry worker named Vince Thurkettle. He was visited by 2 men in black suits in that 2-week window. So before the memo was even made, like years before this was super public, this guy is saying, hey, I work at the forest. These 2 guys in black suits came up to me and asked me a few questions.
I work at the forest.
Well, he's a forestry worker.
Yeah, no, for sure. But it's just,
I don't know what they do.
No, for sure. It's really funny. Hey, I work at the forest.
Hey, this is my office.
I would have been like, word? What do you do? What do you do? What exactly do you do? That's
I commune with the trees.
Yeah.
So anyway, coming back to this, the men questioned Thurkettle, asking him what he saw, if he saw anything on the night of the 26th while working in the forest. Thurkettle said that they asked him things like, quote, did you leave the house at all? Did you see anything? And when he didn't know what they were talking about, they said, quote, oh, there's some report of red lights in the forest. We're just checking. So it's interesting to me that they're divulging any information. They should have just said, we're just asking questions to gather information about an incident. But they said, no. They like seeded him with the idea that there were red lights.
Maybe that was a tactic.
Maybe.
See how he reacted.
Maybe it's a tactic to get him to say something about it. Like, no, it wasn't a craft. You just saw some lights.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Or, yeah, I mean, if you did see something, right? If the red lights was the thing that was like, look, if anyone wants to see anything, it's the red lights. You just straight up be like, oh, yeah, you know that thing that you're like, that's weird. Yeah, there are some red lights. We know it, it's all good.
Yeah. So he responds to that by just saying, okay, well, fair enough. And they go, good day. And then they leave. That's pretty much all that happened there.
Okay.
But it's interesting that these
the
potential men in black
yeah.
arrived at yet another UFO incident. We've talked about them quite a bit. But ultimately, little was known about how the Ministry of Defense handled the investigation, especially after Halt's memo came through, until recently, in the early 2000s, documents were released to the public. This is how we now know how the MOD kind of responded. Former civil servant assigned to the UFO files at the MOD, Simon Whedon, he told journalist Dr. David Clark that, quote, they didn't investigate, but they acted as fact finders, consulting with experts in areas like radar and air defense. The Rendlesham incident ultimately was not considered a defense concern, and so the MOD kind of dismissed it. This is why I think it was so allowed to become public, because they thought in their mind, this wasn't a security issue. This isn't a defense issue. No threat. It's just a conflation of a few events.
Yeah, a bunch of different random things happen, which caused this confusion, and there's nothing to see here.
Yeah. Now, retired Admiral of the Fleet, Lord Peter Hill Norton, questioned the lack of investigation regarding the incident in 1985. He told the MOD that the incident had, quote, puzzling and disquieting features which have never been satisfactorily explained by your department. Again, this is to the Ministry of Defense. And then in later correspondence in 1997 with the MOD, Lord Hill Norton wrote, quote, "My position, both privately and publicly expressed over the last dozen years or more, is that there are only two possibilities. Either A, an intrusion into our airspace and a landing by an unidentified craft took place at Rendlesham as described, or B, the deputy commander of an operational nuclear-armed U.S. Air Force base in England and a large number of his enlisted men were either hallucinating or lying. Either of these simply must be of interest to the Ministry of Defense." Basically pushing back, saying, MOD, regardless of what went down, either it's factually what people are saying or your men under your enlistment are hallucinating or lying or something. This should be of your interest. It's literally what you should be looking into.
Yeah. Interesting that he would say that your men are hallucinating.
Well, they're either seeing things or they're lying about what they saw.
Oh, I took it as like they're either on some type of like government drug or yeah, I mean, I went radical with it.
But either way, wouldn't the MOD want to investigate that?
Yeah, I mean, everything there is just like, it seems. But then I guess they did investigate if they had some experts jump into the field, right? Because it talked about they had like certain experts.
Yeah, I mean, they had people like Air Force members from the base come out and check it out.
Radar experts, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and
I feel like they did like some investigating.
Yeah.
It might have been like a light touch, but they investigated. They actually took that step and they went,
We're getting there. We're like, again, I keep bearing the lead, but in the theories, you'll kind of understand how there's enough to lean on for the MOD to be like, nah, don't worry about it. But there's also enough to lean on that says, I don't know if I would want my Ministry of Defense to be so dismissive of some of these things. Just, all
True.
things considered. Ultimately, though, a few years after he said those words, he asked the case to be reopened in 2001. The MOD then finally responded with this, quote, "No additional information has come to light over the last 20 years to call into question the original judgment of the Ministry of Defense that nothing of defense significance occurred in the location of Rendlesham Forest in 1980. Accordingly, there is no reason to hold an investigation now." Basically saying, nah, we're good. We trust ourselves.
Yeah, we feel like we nailed the judgment call on this one.
Mm-hmm. And then in 2009, the MOD ended all investigation on UFO reports. Christian, was that all UFO incidents, or was it specifically putting to... Because it sounds like they already put this one to rest.
Right.
But in 2009, they're essentially going, any open UFO investigation, done.
What a blanket statement. Like,
right.
Just all, like, prior?
Sounds like it. I'll let Christian just to be super clear, kind of clarify. But as he's looking into that, I'll go through these last few
wild.
Notes,
I never thought of the government just being like, look, this year past, or this year previously.
Right.
Nah.
He's good. Like, aliens come in 2010, so we'll just close all these ones up. Yeah. Well, UFO investigator and former MOD civil servant of the, quote, UFO desk, Nick Pope, was interviewed on the show called I Know What I Saw back in 2009. In that interview, he used the internal memo from the MOD files, which said, quote, "The value of 0.1 milliroentgens seems significantly higher than the average background of 0.015 milliroentgens. He went on to use these files as an argument that the MOD never undertook any investigation into the radiation levels, therefore never establishing the truth about Halt's findings, basically calling the MOD kind of hypocritical, that they are acknowledging a few outlying elements that are worth investigating, but then at the same time you're saying there's nothing worth investigating here because it's not a security issue, so just end it.
Right. But also along the way, it's like you didn't do your due diligence type thing, where it's just like you kind of looked at it.
Right.
Didn't really chase anything down, and you're like, it's all good.
Well, you're admitting that something was a little out of ordinary.
Right.
But because it's not a security issue, leave it.
Weird.
It's possible. It could just be a natural occurrence, but that's when I would want at least a private company or a private team or some other team to come through and debunk the radiation thing or thoroughly explain it.
I don't know. I just also feel like you're between... Here's the thing, too. Like, I don't know what kind of jurisdiction the U.S. would have across, like, on foreign soil. But, like, if you're between two air bases, you think either the U.K. or the U.S. would take extra measures? I mean, if it's, like, between two air bases... Like, I guess, like, again, I don't know what level of authority the U.S. has on, like, foreign soil, but
probably very little,
right?
Except for at this base where there is an actual partnership to have U.S. Air Force.
Well, yeah,
Well,
like there's partnership and at least authority enough to exist. And, even in the same space, but like for both of them, just go, it's good.
Yeah,
that's weird.
It like I said, there. At the very end of this, I'll outline all the conflationary events to me. But like right now, at what we have is a few conflicting sources of the story. I mean, even far as detailed as, was it hovering or on 3 legs? You have a little bit with that in the radiation. You have both governments, not with different stories, but one government immediately going, no, it's not a security or defensive threat. So we're going to throw it out, because that's what the MOD is about. They're not just like, let's investigate this odd natural event. Then there's also some meteorological stuff going down. There are some landmarks in the area that will impact this. So I almost think that as we get into the theories, that this was just a very, very unique stretch of circumstances. And what you're talking about with the US and the Royal Air Force both being in the area just adds more. So it creates a very muddy environment to really, makes it hard to dissect all of the pure truths.
Man, there's gotta be some like asteroid or pieces of debris.
I'm telling you, this man's psychic. All right, Christian, what went down in 2009 with the MOD and UFO files?
Yeah, I double checked, and in 2009, the MOD did completely shutter its entire UFO division or unit, whatever you want to call it. They basically said it was a waste of time and money.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Wow. That's such a different take than what we hear in the US.
Yeah, the US is like, no.
Yeah,
we won't talk about it.
Right.
Stay out of Area 51.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they said that, sorry to interrupt, they said, quote, no UFO sighting reported to the MOD has ever revealed anything to suggest an extraterrestrial presence or military threat to the UK.
You just got to appreciate how candid the English can be.
So candid.
I love that.
They're like, there's been no threat, there's been no contact, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And waste the goddamn money.
But you know what? I feel a bifurcation. I feel it in the task force. There's something in the air. Like what that does to people like you and me, right? As we kind of investigate these things, is it splits the mind. On one hand, you think, well, is the government just carte blanche wiping out all UFO stuff because they're covering something up? Or pragmatically, is it because it actually is a waste of resources and it's getting in the way of actual defensive military strategy, whatever? So they just say, no, please stop poking us about these things that aren't as fancy as UFOs. They're just small things.
I mean, if you think about it on like a realistic train of thought, how big is that division really?
The MOD?
No, I'm talking about like the specific group,
the UFO
that
team.
is like the UFO team, right?
Right.
How big is that group really?
Yeah.
What they use in terms of tech must be expensive to use, and probably has a ton of different other priorities. It's just like, and then what do you do 365 days of the year?
Man, that must be a very interesting job.
Well,
I'm sure you sift through a lot of stories, a lot of emails saying, I saw something. I got sucked up into the air.
But then I guess
toes
you just
first, spat onto the roof of a Wendy's with my pants off.
Spat onto the roof of a Wendy's. It's always a Wendy's.
Yeah, it's an SNL sketch.
Yeah,
but
I'd love that's your go-to reference.
It cracks me up. It's one of my favorites. But here's the thing. You kind of made me start thinking about something. So Nick Pope, who we just quoted about, hey, why aren't we actually looking into the radiation? Because you did say actually it did spike up to 0.1, you know? He said this all in 2009 in the same year that essentially the entire UFO desk, as it were, was shuttered at the MOD. So do you now have a disgruntled employee who's going to either lash out with facts or lash out emotionally because his department was just shuttered? Or do you have somebody who's a firm believer who thinks that this is all being swept under the rug? Like, it really calls into question some of his motivation, right? Not to disparage the individual, but I mean, 2009, the same year that they just nixed all the stuff that he had been working on, right?
I will say, if you're a part of that division and you're emotional and disgruntled, how do you not see this coming? Like, you just thought you'd be rocking in the UFO division until you retire. I don't know. I'd feel like if I was a part of that division, I'd be like, man, we're still here.
Yeah.
Like, what use am I going to be really? Unless there is actual UFO stuff.
Yeah.
What use am I really? I'm just like sifting through a bunch of.
You're working your way up to be a Men in Black. You're working your way up like a Will Smith character, trying to get that suit on, and trying to make it look good.
True. I guess you could be training for that. Or studying
fingerprints
for
melted
that.
off.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting. It also makes me think, especially since this incident went down in 1980, that if you were to plot out the incidents per year, with the y-axis being the number of incidents and the x-axis being whatever year it is, I almost feel like you'd see a bell curve of incidents and UFO sightings that would strongly correlate to the war efforts and the Cold War threats and the growth of tech with the space race and everything. I think it's in the zeitgeist. It's on the tongue. There's a lot of things going down. There's a lot of unknown. There's a lot of top secret files happening. So I think there's a value to a UFO desk, to a UFO department. Now, whether it's strictly about aliens or a kind of hybrid team that's just our alien department, but actually they're seeking information regarding what the air quotes enemy is up to, what kind of satellites are out there or missiles activities are happening. Like, I don't know. And maybe as things wound down going into the 21st century, these departments kind of shudder and we start throwing out the baby with the bathwater, saying that none of these are substantial or relevant to us anymore. Maybe that's what it is.
It could be. Or the flip side, the government's like, yeah, it doesn't exist. We're disbanding the group.
We operate on people taxes, okay? We're not going to start funding.
No, but they say all that, and they're like, no, we're just kidding. That's a public thing. Keep it going.
Right.
Keep it going. Doing great.
Anyway, I mean, you can see now how this relates so well to Roswell.
Yeah.
Some mysterious craft that has a lot of eyewitnesses showed up somewhere. There were pictures that then disappeared. There's different conflicting stories. It's so interesting. And with that said, let's dive into the theories because there's so much more information, especially once you get into the realm of each particular theory.
Yeah. I want to know what the excuses are for the lights.
Yeah. Well, I think, like I said, your gut instinct as always is right in line with some of these things. And I want to say for the believers out there, the people that tend to believe more in the supernatural and they have their mind more open to aliens, don't be deflated by these first couple theories because, again, it's a conflation of a lot of events. There's still some unknown, despite some of these theories being pretty strong answers as to what went down. Hey there, Task Force. Trevor here, as always, with some updates here on Red Web. Reminder that we have the Pin of the Month Club happening now, the beginning of every month. That first Monday, you can mark your calendars. We got a new pin every month. In fact, the first Monday of September is actually going to have a pin as well as a shirt. So that's September 5th. Be on the lookout. And then later in the month, we'll actually have a little coin, a commemorative coin that we'll start talking about a little bit more that supports two of our least favorite creatures, if you know what we're talking about. But otherwise, that will actually come out with a new project that Red Web is launching there in September as well. So all ears on deck, all eyes on social. Red Web has some stuff in the works, and they are finally coming to fruition. If you like Red Web, you want more content out of these boys, it's coming. Don't you worry. With that said, though, I want to talk about some of our sponsors. This episode of Red Web is sponsored by Audible. These days, everyone has wild schedules. I'm sure many of you Task Force members, you're always on the go, always got something to do, always got something to see. And we don't have a lot of times to do the things that we might want to do, such as reading. And that's why we're talking about Audible, okay? Because Audible offers an incredible selection of audiobooks across every single genre. You've got bestsellers in there, all the way to new releases, to celebrity memoirs. There's mysteries and thrillers. You got motivational stuff. You got wellness stuff, business, and so much more. You'll discover exclusive Audible originals from top celebrities, renowned experts, and exciting new voices in audio. All Audible members get access to a growing selection of audiobooks, Audible originals, and podcasts that are all included with that membership. You can listen to all you want, and more gets added every single month. I've used Audible many times in the past when I'm ever in the gym, excited about my workout, but also want to keep my stories going. I listened to American Gods, and that was a really fun way to listen to that amazing story by Neil Gaiman, but also still get my swole on in the gym like a scientist, you know. But that's the thing. If you ever want to get outside, you ever want to work out, there's a lot of goals we all have. I love that Audible can come in and help facilitate that, distract your brain from maybe the stamina that you need while you're running. So you can listen to those favorite books of yours while you're doing other stuff. It's really nice. I really enjoy that. Let Audible help you discover new ways to laugh, be inspired, or simply be entertained. New members can try it for free for 30 days by visiting audible.com/redweb or simply text redweb to 500-500. Once again, that's audible.com/redweb or text redweb to 500-500 to try Audible free for 30 days. Audible.com/redweb. This episode of RedWeb is also sponsored by Surfshark. Websites, hackers, and third-party companies all monitor your online behavior. Even your internet service provider, your ISP, can monitor and sell your online behavior to other third parties. In short, you explore and do your thing online, just living your life, and some other people are profiting off that activity. Unless you have a VPN. The easy-to-use product that can help you prevent all of what I just said. It masks your location and makes it more difficult to distinguish you from a crowd of other users. And if you want even more security, Surfshark also has your back. They have an awesome product called Surfshark Alert, which alerts you every time your personal data has been leaked online somewhere. They also have Surfshark Search, which enables you to use a search engine like you would. However, it doesn't have any of the tracking or targeted ads that clogs up the other works. It's pretty nice. Try Surfshark risk-free for 30 days or get your money back. It's a guarantee, they say. Get Surfshark VPN at surfshark.deals/redweb. Enter promo code REDWEB for 83, okay, a whopping 83% off and 3 extra months for free. Once again, that's surfshark.deals/redweb. And with that said, let's dive right back into the forest. Let's dive into the first one, that this was some form of astronomical phenomenon. Astronomers reported a fireball meteor falling over southern England around the time of the first reported UFO sighting in Rendlesham. This may have been what was caught on radar by Heathrow. Halt claimed that one of the bright lights broke up into 5 other lights and then disappeared, and this could have been a meteor because that is very common for a meteor to break up in the atmosphere.
Broke up, no light.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In fact, the British Astronomical Association reported that the same night of the Rendlesham incident, there was a, quote, fireball meteor that was seen around 2:50 a.m. That's about 10 minutes shy of this incident going down. It was also not the only meteor seen in southern England that night. Others have stated that the star-like objects Halt saw might have been simply that, actual stars. UFO sightings have commonly been debunked over the years as being misinterpretations of stars or other astronomical events, and astronomers have theorized that they may have been stars giving off that supernatural aura in some way due to atmospheric conditions that create optical illusions. It's a very easy claim to make. It's hard to prove because there's so many rare atmospheric events that happen, but either way, it is an interesting solve for what went down that night. And as mentioned before, 2 of the star-like objects were in the north and one was in the south, and that southernmost light matched roughly the position of Sirius, which is the brightest star in the night sky. And so perhaps that is what they were seeing in the south.
That's it. That's what they saw.
Now, remember the conflation of events. The subtle spike of radiation, the clearing in the woods with the supposed landing gear. It doesn't answer those pieces, but it does answer the one star going into, or the one light going into 5 for sure.
I mean, it could also answer the slight spike in radiation.
It could.
Yeah.
It could if like a piece of one of those meteors ended up in this clearing or created the clearing.
Or just
Absolutely.
little like chips in the like soil.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, slight spike. There goes the lights.
Mm-hmm.
Now look, in terms of what the men saw, I don't know what they were on that night.
Right. They're like, listen, I could sell a novel off this night.
Right.
You know?
The meteors like came on in, and then all of a sudden, you know, they saw some stuff, and like,
Yeah.
what if would it look like this?
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
You know, that really draws into question Right. Like the very question you brought up at the top of this, Mr. Psychic, like when we these days, 2022, show up at a place, an incident, whatever, phones at the ready, talking about live streaming it, capturing it all, and disseminating it to the hive mind of the internet. We're talking about the 80s. Totally different way of thinking. These are all things that are now ingrained in us as tools.
True.
I really wonder, like, I mean, we could talk to our parents, of course, but I would be very interested to know from an adult of that age, like what would go through their mind given the tools of the environment. Like, because are they thinking like, I should turn this into a book? That's how I get the information out. I should really take this truth and exaggerate it to make
go
some
to the
news.
newspaper.
Like, yeah. But then in telling the story, does it go through the news filter of getting exaggerated for the sake of selling papers? Like, it's just a totally different situation.
It's just like you saw some lights. So like, no, but there was a triangle with a red ball on top. To make it feel like you're less of a foolish person, and so you can't be dismissed, you add more details, perhaps. Like, no, and then it flew away. Yeah, I could see that.
Well, like I said, don't be deflated because while it does sound very pragmatic, there are some other very interesting theories that certainly answer what went down that night.
Question.
Yes.
Before we get into that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we've had debris from outer space land on Earth and whatnot, and stuff that we've actually like gathered. I mean, is that like, I know nothing about this. Has just been like rare minerals that we've gathered
absolutely.
From that? What do we even do with that?
Usually we analyze it. Normally that goes to a space agency where they would kind of be very careful with it, analyze it for microbes or anything of that nature. Usually do scans on it before kind of really getting into it, but you can like take core samples or whatever, analyze what's in it. A lot of times it's iron or nickel or a base metal that you would find at the core of a planet because these rocks are baby planets. And you know what I mean? And they usually collide and make the planets and whatnot, but
oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was just questioning. I was like, oh man, that must be so cool. You're like, this is way out there.
I'm sure there are some rare metals like in trace ways. There's definitely radioactive elements.
Oh, 1,000%.
But those heavier elements
to be like, I don't know what this like mineral is or something like that.
They're usually much more basic.
Yeah,
like
I would assume so.
Those rare metals are much heavier. Many like the atomic weight is much heavier, so they take a lot more time, pressure, and energy to make. Whereas something like iron is much more readily available throughout the cosmos. But with all that said, space geek-isms aside, Orfordness Lighthouse is the next theory because the lighthouse was on Orford Ness in Suffolk, England, and it was torn down in 2020, so we can't really go and check it out and see how it plays today. But there's a lot of interesting information regarding this one. The light had a range of 25 nautical miles and was directly visible from the forest. Boom. The local police, when they arrived on the scene on December 26th, they did not see any other light other than that of the lighthouse. Boom. In the 1980s, the Orfordness Lighthouse was one of the brightest lighthouses in all of the UK. So the fact that it's visible from the forest, the fact that it's the brightest stands out. Triple boom. In a U.S. Air Force statement of witness in 1981, two of the original witnesses, Cavensag and Burroughs, wrote that they, quote, could see a beacon going around, so we went towards it. We followed it for about 2 miles or 3 kilometers before we could see it coming from a lighthouse, end quote. So many think that they were just seeing this lighthouse, but in that very same letter, Burroughs drew the picture of the craft. So again, I refer back to the theme of
lighthouse.
I mean, it could have been. The light that they saw very well could have been this lighthouse. Now, it draws into question, again, the radiation, but also they're the ones that drew the triangular spacecraft. So then you have to say, are you lying? Did you hallucinate?
Yeah.
Or did you actually see something? Because, again, the lighthouse doesn't address those elements.
True. I mean, it's kind of getting down to just like trusting them and their word. Here's the thing.
Absolutely.
I'm thinking it's piecing together like a Megazord.
That's what I'm saying.
Rangers, right?
You just went with a way stronger metaphor.
It's a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Like this
morphing
like
time.
It's morphing time. The theories are piecing together like a Megazord. It's going to be a bunch of these things together.
That's what I see. I didn't want to spill the beans, but now that we're in the theories, this is what I was talking about. There are a lot of things that really make sense but they answer pieces of this story one at a time.
I mean, but the thing is, like, so far, the lighthouse and what was that, a comet?
Yeah, meteor.
Meteor? Okay. So the lighthouse and the meteor, those things, they happened.
Mm-hmm.
And
around the same time.
Yeah. And so just that we know to be true, that we know to be fact.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
You gesture like Zeus. We know this.
Oh, I did. And my arms went wide.
You flicked too hard.
I looked at it. Yeah.
But again, I love to tease. I love to bury the lead, but there's a couple more theories that I really want to explore. Okay. 3 more, in fact, 2 a little bit more specific. So the next theory we're going to talk about is that of a Soviet spy satellite. Now, there was an Anglo-American experimental over-the-horizon radar station in Orford Ness, coming back to that same destination there in England. It was designed to detect missile threats coming from Russia. Now, if you know much about the Cold War or the Cuban Missile Crisis, this was a very common program, and there are missile detection sites all around the world because of these threats. This radar station went by the name of Cobra Mist, and the station was operational from 1971 to 1973. I'm not going to go into the colorful history of the building and the subsequent shutdown of this base, but it was active in those years. Many years prior to this incident, I'll say. Now, it is believed that the NSA used this station to emit an energy beam upon a Soviet spy satellite named the Russian Cosmos 749 rocket. The goal ultimately was to halt the trajectory of this Christmas Day missile in 1980. So essentially saying they lasered down a foreign spy satellite or missile of some nature. And that is what kind of came down, creating a crash site, and then subsequently was cleaned up before an investigation could take place later in that very day.
That's wild.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Sounds fanciful, doesn't it?
Yeah, that sounds like, man, that is like a 4-part TV series.
Right.
I mean, that's a fast cleanup.
It's a pretty fast cleanup, but if it's just a lasered down missile,
true.
You're not going to have a whole lot. But
what I'm thinking about right now is there any way to, if they cleaned it up before the investigation came through, I'm trying to think if there's any way to tie that to what they said they saw.
Right. So
like,
if you want to go this route, I mean, again, you could have seen a meteor, or the other option is this. You saw a rocket re-entering over the northwest area of Europe, and that is what is coming through as the UFO reports. It being lasered down out of the sky, the falling debris, is what could have been those other lights. So 1 light going into 5, and then those lights then disappearing, could have been it burning out in the atmosphere with some pieces making it down. But to your point, though, it's a harder story to believe, and on top of that, there's no evidence to confirm whether or not this reentry had any direct correlation with the Rendlesham sightings only a few hours later. So again, this is a distinct event that went down that night, hours earlier.
Really cool theory.
It really is. It's so cool. It feels like a movie.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, going back to, something that we were already laid out earlier.
Mm-hmm.
There was just, the thing too is like there was no talks of like it's usually 1 light. There were like 5.
Yeah.
They burnt out. They usually don't. And the thing is, like, it didn't seem like it changed trajectory. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's like it's hovered or it went one way, then the other way. This is like it fell down.
Yeah.
Like it just like, just careened down from the sky.
Right.
And so that's the thing. Most UFO sightings, it's just like I saw a light in the sky and it moved. And
Right. I think the only kind of conversation about what was moving were in reference to the 2 northern lights and the 1 southern light, and saying that they were moving
already
in
on the ground.
weird angular ways.
Yeah.
Normally, to your point, you hear about, well, it was going faster than it could possibly go, and then suddenly changed direction and then disappeared, then reappeared. Like, that's usually what you hear. Or you hear about lights in a line or in a pattern.
Right.
Rarely do they split. I have heard about stories where a light becomes multiple, but they stay in a pattern.
Yeah, they don't just continuously fall from
Yeah.
the sky. You don't hear that with like UFO sightings.
Yeah. Well, let's go down the rabbit hole before we back ourselves back up and close this one out. Let's talk about the theory that this was an honest to God UFO incident or some form of crash that was subsequently covered up by the Ministry of Defense. It all starts with the idea that the MOD did not believe that there was any significance to the sightings and subsequently didn't believe that there should be an investigation. This, of course, raises the eyebrows of many skeptics because, it's good to look at the world inquisitively.
Mm-hmm.
Though some wonder, based on the amount of documents from the MOD, if there might have been an actual deliberate cover-up. Though these documents are largely internal correspondence on Rendlesham rather than active investigatory procedures. Some people are like, well, there's a lot of documents, and other people are like, yeah, but that's just them talking about the one thing. Either way, in 2010, Halt signed a document claiming what he saw and what others saw was real, and that the UK and the US were both teaming up to cover this up. The document has since been known as the Halt Affidavit, and Halt restated what he and the others witnessed in Rendlesham, and that he believed what they saw was of extraterrestrial origin. Basically just coming back to Halt himself, and he's the linchpin for this being an extraterrestrial event. He claimed that other servicemen had revealed Woodbridge held nuclear weapons, and that both the United States and the UK have worked to cover up what happened that night. Royal Air Force Bentwaters was a former Air Force base that was a twin to the Royal Air Force Woodbridge, and Bentwater was the home to a secret stash of nuclear weapons that held about 25 fortified underground bunkers. And so,
holy hell.
I personally would say that regardless of this being a UFO thing or a spy thing or just a natural phenomenon,
mm-hmm.
they would be inclined to sweep this away very quickly. Again, regardless of origin, mostly because of the sensitive nature of these bases and the climate they were in.
Yeah, I mean, the climate would have a big part of it. And then kind of thinking about it now, I mean, as much as you have the force of those two governments, I mean, think about how much faster you can clean things up.
Mm-hmm.
What if aliens are just us
from the future?
No.
Do you think past tourism, like a zoo, like if you could, do you think that's going to be a thing? Like in the year 5028, they're like, hey, I wanted for my vacation, I'm going to go back to 2018 and just watch them.
Well, I mean,
the way you said, just watch them.
I mean, what do you do at a zoo?
Scary.
You just watch them.
Sounds so intimidating.
Anyways, to your question.
Yeah, no.
That they're just us.
No, they're just us. What if we were a part of it at advanced, what if we are the advanced alien race?
Yeah, and
then there was a group
aircraft flying around.
Yeah, and they're trying to get in contact with us. But there was a group that disbanded and wanted to essentially reset and go back. And so they found this backwater planet, landed, restarted. And then since then have just kind of been trying to keep ourselves from informing ourselves of what we really are.
So we are phase 2, basically of a galactic colony, but we're just like this under the radar, off the books colony that is totally unaware of our own existence.
Yes.
That's a fanciful story, and I love it.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's a story idea right there. I want to watch that movie.
All right, copyrighted here by Red Web Task Force.
Oh man, this is gonna be a movie about that. We're like, we thought of that.
Hey, good thing Task Force headquarters is working on a library remodeling. We got a writers department going. Again, we're completely understaffed. We have about 16 departments and 2 people. So I mean, things are molding and changing, and we're just taking out loan after loan to keep this thing afloat.
So many loans.
I mean, it's
so many high interest loans.
There's a lot of fraud happening. We keep taking loans out on people that don't exist.
Yeah, that'd be crazy.
Future children will wake up to a task force loan already on their record. They're like, dang,
unfortunately, your parents were task force members. Yeah, what if it's just us keeping ourselves from ourselves?
I think there's a lot of interesting ways that angle could crack down, right? It could be us from the future. It could be us from another planet. It could be us right now with just top secret aircraft that are experimental and we just don't know about yet.
Yeah,
I mean,
true.
Any level of that I think is so interesting to me. But to close out the idea of this being a cover up, I'll say it kind of simply. There's a lot of conflicting, again, verbal reports regarding what went down on radar that night. You know, there was the one event from Heathrow saying, hey, we've pinged something on radar near Woodbridge, Royal Air Force Base. You should check that out. And then there's also some other lights. And so people are like, well, what about those other lights? Were they on radar? Answer, no. But then other military experts are coming forward saying, I disagree. I saw them on radar that night. However, the records were scrubbed. That is something that I only want to discuss because I can't get to the origin of that. I can't really scrutinize that for authenticity, but it is something that is consistently debated. You know what I mean? But with that said, we're going to move on to the final theory that is kind of a catch-all for a few different events that happened that night. And this just throws a wrench into the whole. So many unique things went down that night. It was a perfect melting pot to create something unsolved. It just turned out to be a UFO incident. So let's talk about what this theory is that this is a hoax and or a hoax that got mixed up. Maybe not intentionally a hoax, but something just a little bit more mundane. And this is a major theory behind the Rendlesham incident. So let's talk about it. A former U.S. policeman, Kevin Conde, told BBC in June of 2003 that he was the one responsible for the lights. Get this. He said that night he was driving around and these were the results of him modifying his lights on his police vehicle and then driving around the forest that night. The modification of his police vehicle was supposedly part of a police exercise, with him saying this, quote, "I drove my patrol car out of sight from the gatehouse, turned on the red and blue emergency lights, and pointed my white flashlights through the mist into the air." That answers the blue, the red, and the white lights that the craft was described to have had. Following the fact that the event occurred in a few days following Christmas, it's unlikely that exercises would have been conducted on these days, right? Certainly 3 a.m. following Christmas. So there's a bit of a wrinkle in that, but True. It does answer if he's driving through the forest with these bright lights.
But it does seem like a super, sole purpose of one person mundane exercise.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem like it's just him, right? So
it's just like he's like,
I gotta get this done at some point. Let me do this.
Or it's just being a goofball and just rolling around with modified lights.
It's just weird. Just to be like, I was a cop that installed angel lights on his vehicle.
Now, the fact that this came out 23 years later, the fact that it tries to answer everything in one fell swoop, left a lot of skeptics to believe that Conde was asked by the U.S. Air Force to come forward with this story as a way to essentially cover up the potential UFO research going down. But again, if this was factual, that went down that night, now you have this satellite incident, this missile incident, you have a meteor, you have an actual lighthouse, and now you have a cop running lights through the woods that night. These all very nicely answer things. Now it's really hard to delineate fact from fiction.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that happened at 3 a.m. The thing is, half of that is actually factual. Right? The lighthouse and then the comet.
Right. Was the missile thing also factual to some degree? Maybe not the lasering down of it, but Christian, that that there was in fact a missile, or was that just hearsay that it re-entered the atmosphere over Northwest Europe?
Because then if that is as well, to some degree, then it's like, man, boy, oh boy, was that an active hour.
Mm-hmm.
It was indeed a factual event. There's a report on the re-entry that can be found on the Journal of the British Astronomical Association. You can go read about it.
I was just confirming because that's what I thought. That was a few hours before that incident.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. That's the saber-tooth tiger leg of the Megazord.
Oh, what? That's the chest piece. The saber tooth should have been the head. That's the cool part. I mean, rather than a human face with a crown on it, just
pterodactyl.
Oh man, I don't remember. Depends on which Power Rangers franchise you're into.
Alfredo's already on it. I'm not even gonna bother.
Oh yeah. The right leg was saber-tooth. The left leg was Triceratops. The Mastodon was the shield. The T-Rex was essentially the body piece, and then the front shield of that plate was the pterodactyl. And of course, the head flips from the
right.
Yeah, from the T-Rex. Yeah, there you go. We pieced together the Megazord. Oh, that is this mystery.
Yeah. I like the idea then that whoever's sitting in they're all sitting in the chest piece. Let's be real. But if somebody was sitting in the head, Like they're all there. But before they all suddenly just end up in the same control room, they all have their own. What if you were sitting in the headpiece, the head rotates, but your gear malfunction, and so your chair rotates with the head? So you're just like, guys, I'm stuck upside down. Like, doesn't matter. We're fighting right now.
Yeah.
Blood rushing to my head.
A malfunction during that, like, it must be frequent. Like, that's not going to function.
I want to see all the Power Rangers episodes where they had tech malfunctions.
Yeah.
You know?
We work with tech daily, and every day.
Every
is
day.
an issue.
Yeah. But to continue on with the idea of this being a hoax, we have the police officer now coming forward. And then, as recently as December 2018, British UFO researcher David Clark reported a claim that the incident was a revenge plotted by the SAS on the U.S. Air Force. The story claims that on August of 1980, the SAS parachuted into the Royal Air Force Woodbridge to probe the perimeters of the site and test their security measures. The U.S. Air Force detected the SAS men entering their base on the radars, and the SAS troops were criticized as, quote, unidentified aliens. And so it was almost like maybe a revenge or maybe a secret training thing or whatever, but basically to test the abilities of this base, they were like, let's just send in a couple of troops and see if they catch them. I don't know.
That's very random.
It's very random.
Hey, adjacent base, you know what? Let's just go ahead and test their defenses.
Right. Like some sort of weird prank. And as it goes, they were interrogated and beaten up. So some believe the SAS told the U.S. Air Force their own version of the story from that night as payback. Basically just throwing out a bunch of hearsay. But as it continues on, it says, quote, as December approached, lights and colored flares were rigged in the woods. Black helium balloons were also coupled to remote-controlled kites to carry suspended materials into the sky, activated by radio controls. So, after further investigation, Clark ruled this story out as a hoax, but these are two potential hoax-centric answers as to what went down that night.
Almost like prankish.
It very much is.
Two things. One, why wouldn't they just come forward and be like, hey, look, it was just a hazing or a pranking of like between
and why
two
are
bases.
you doing that at a military base?
True. It's boys being boys. Going even just a step back.
Yeah.
Why are you beating up people from an adjacent? I'd be like, look, let me just go down the block and show you that I'm from that base. I don't understand the whole.
Well, then it's like, you made me scared. Yeah. You made me think aliens were real.
Oh, yeah? You want to
don't
test
know.
our defenses? Test these fists.
How does this alien fist taste? I don't know.
It's just...
Christian, was this just a story, or was this also one of those proven events? I don't know.
Swear
I
if you tell me that this was proven.
I believe it's a hoax, ultimately.
It
or
must
like,
be just
the thing is, it's
hearsay.
widely believed as hoax, but, you know, what if it was also just swept under the rug? And the MOD is just saying, listen, there's nothing of security or defensive importance here. It's just idiots. Okay, please just stop looking into it because it makes our Air Force look embarrassing.
Yeah, we're not going to say this because then you guys just would be like, oh, why are they, messing around?
Right.
They should be doing their job.
Right. Tax-paying time.
Right.
Yeah, just from a quick look, it's reported on, but it doesn't look like there's any verifiable proof that this happened.
Yeah. Either way, though, the Rendlesham UFO incident here in this forest is a really interesting one. You can see why it gets called the Britain's Roswell incident. There's a lot of similar factors in play. There's a lot of misinformation in play. Either way, as someone who finds the UFO stories and sightings very intriguing and loves space and loves the idea of thinking about extraterrestrial beings, the story is fascinating.
I think it's fascinating because it's like...
As much as it is frustrating.
It's a good chunk of it is like a grounded UFO incident.
Yeah.
Most of them are like in the sky.
Right. There's not a lot of fanciful, like, these crazy things happened. It was just kind of like, I saw this and so on and so forth.
But also, of course, there had to be a damn lighthouse. Of course, there had to be like a meteor shower or
a missile coming in while a meteor was coming down while the UK's brightest lighthouse is shining down on the forest. While some guy's probably drunkenly stupering through the forest, making up. I don't know.
What if it was an alien that was like, it's time to reveal ourselves, and then all this other stuff happened?
No, I'm over here.
And we're like, no, like this right here. Like I'm trying to invite you guys to like the
Come
intergalactic society.
Yeah.
And just so many things happen. We're just like, nah, that never.
He's
that
like,
never
the
went
alien's
down.
tapping his little webbed foot, looking at his watch, going, they should have been here by now.
Yeah.
They would have seen me.
Yeah. They have the technology.
They got the technology, man. What? And then he's like, screw it. They're all distracted by these other events. I'm going to get in my craft. He gets back in. He's sat down. He's buckling his safety belt. It's got 13 harnesses, and he's pushing all the buttons.
13 horses.
He's pushing all the
he's
buttons.
pushing a lot of G's.
And he's like, I guess I'll get out of here just in time for a crew to roll up, see the craft, and see him leave. We missed intergalactic
We missed
peace.
the invite.
A galactic trade federation, a handshake deal with the great beyond by seconds because we were distracted by a falling rock.
Man, not only does
And
that
a lighthouse.
would that have been unfortunate, also like, do we want to know about that? Like, we would be on like such a low tier on that food chain.
Yeah.
If we're invited, they're
Yeah.
like, all right, we'll let them in. Sure. Like, look,
Here come the Stone Age, folks.
Right.
Whoa,
Like,
they got
we-
touch screens.
we would be
All right.
such a low tier.
Gas
Maybe
up your planes.
I'm sure
or
there's
whatever.
a group of low tier, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
other planets that are also in that group,
Right.
but we'd be looking like, look at they could travel. They've already conquered multiple planets.
Right.
They don't have to deal with like poverty or health issues or anything.
Right.
And we would just be a
They're
bunch
gonna-
of jealous a-holes.
If we bring them in, they're going to muddy up our paradise. What we
Yeah,
probably
our
have.
paradise.
I stand by my own personal theory that all these UFO incidents are just pranksters, teens with tech from the great beyond, all these aliens that they take their dad's UFO on a nice little spin. They come down and basically do the interstellar equivalent of throwing rocks at us, and then they leave. They're just like, look at these little guys. They're gonna tell stories about us. Bye. And then they leave. And then we're just left going like, wow, were we contacted? And they're just like, what a prank.
Well,
Remember last night when we got drunk on alien wine and went to Earth?
Yeah. Well, where are the aliens that want to help us then? That are having the infomercials of like,
They're looking at us throw rocks at
like,
each other and saying, nah.
for a little bit of our technology, we can help. You two can help these humans
Bro,
live
are
a
you-
better life. And it's like,
Are you serious?
Man, it's like, where are the people that want to like? Where are the aliens that want to like save us and like better? Don't want to see us dying and at war.
If you're hanging in the rainforest and you see a lemur come down from the top canopies, are you going to say, let me introduce to you my smartphone? The lemur kingdom can become one with the humans. We're too far beyond. So we look down upon them much like aliens would look down upon us. Why would they
communicate?
Why would they reach
If
out?
lemurs could communicate, I'd be like, how you doing, little homie? You need anything? No?
Dolphins have language.
They do.
We've marked it like at least 100 words. I don't know what those words
That's
are, but like
insane.
when they measure their patterns of
Yeah.
sounds, there's like a repetition to it that's akin to language. Now, would we reach out and try to be like, let's create a bond, Mr. Dolphin?
I'll reach out and be like, you good? Anything we can do for you guys? And then probably be like, stop with the damn environment abuse.
Oh, right. They're like, yeah, we could start by cleaning up all the plastic in the Pacific,
Yeah.
choking up my aunt and uncle.
Jesus.
I don't know. I just gave a really like personal story for a dolphin.
But yeah, I don't know. Who
Yeah.
knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
Will we know in our lifetime? Probably not.
I don't know, man. You think back the last 100 years, you think of how much has changed, how much is common knowledge now. We might. We don't know what this world will look like in 50
what if that's
years.
the advanced humans behind the scenes and there's a new
Wait a
person in
minute.
charge and they're like, you know what?
Wait
This
a
is going
minute.
too slow. Let's trickle in a little more technology.
Are you telling me that this is future task force messing with us right now? Next generation task force interfering with first generation task force? Love to see it.
Well,
We could use some future funding though.
Yeah, we could. Also, like, maybe a picture of Bigfoot.
Right. Come on.
Like,
Help us break out.
right?
here,
Like,
you know?
come on. The space is crowded.
Right.
Give us something.
It's like going back to Beethoven and handing him all of his music. Just saying, go for it. Like,
Yeah.
come on, just
you
come
would
back.
have got here eventually.
Just come back, crack open all these cases that we're already going to crack open.
Yeah, it's
Just
only a
crack them
matter
open
of
for us.
time.
Just save that budge. But anyway, this has been the Rendlesham Forest mystery. The incident continues us. This is week 2. We have 2 more episodes coming
Mhm.
on eerie, creepy forests around the world, whether it be paranormal or UFO incidents or true crime.
Right.
There's a lot of spooky forests out there. And so we wanted to cover some of those this month.
Yeah.
With that said, Fredo, I'll see you back here next Monday for another forest mystery.
It was all those things, or some of those things, put together, and that's the thick ghost baby stamp of approval.
Yeah, can't be wrong. You say it all.